Hey guys, happy Monday. Many of you enjoyed our episode with Celine. We are finishing that interview tonight. I love it. So in the beginning, she talked about her experience at Journal of Mormon Polygamy, Jump, and now she is talking about her own research, what she's learned while studying 19th century polygamous women in Utah and the surrounding areas. A lot of history that you probably don't know too well. Her major point is that the experience of these women is getting downplayed and erased um, through the argument of polygamy denial.
I think that when there's no room to entertain the possible benefits and validate the experiences of people who have had positive experiences and like speculate on like what were the problems, what could have been the solutions. Like I'm definitely willing to engage with the abuses and things that we should condemn about it. But it's frustrating. It's just really frustrating to me how much it erases the voices of women. And I do have a bunch of examples about this if we want to go through any of them.
Yeah, talk to me about it. I'd love that.
Okay, cool. So, one thing I want to talk about is just like let's get some observations. So we have Elizabeth Wood Kane in 12 Mormon Homes. And she's referring to these two women who are a telegrapher and a clerk telegrapher. And she says it was an example of one of the contradictions of Mormonism, thousands of years behind us in some of their customs, and in others you would think them the most forward children of the age. They close no career on a woman in Utah by which she can earn a living. Like that's significant. The fact that it's like these women are earning their own money. These women are having jobs. These women are employed. And so that's interesting. Then there's this other quote. I've seen a Mormon father pet and humor a spoiled 35th child, a red-headed one too, with as unreasonable fondness as the youngest papa could show his firstborn. Um, I think that
Right.
that's really that this idea of like, oh, these children were abandoned by fathers and didn't have the paternal investment. Like, I don't think that that's innately true. I think that
Yeah.
here's an example of that of like, okay, well, he's clearly invested. That doesn't mean that there were men who weren't invested. And we know that we have good outcomes from children when they are invested, but people have big families all the time, so we can look at that. Here's another one. Uh, it had been one of the accepted beliefs with which my mind was stocked before entering Utah, that every mother would be found to regret the birth of a daughter as a misfortune.
Hold
This is
up, hold
not
up,
so.
Celine. Hold up, Celine. Guys, you need to listen to this quote. This is the best paragraph in the entire book. All right. Celine, start us
Yes.
from scratch again.
Yes. It had been one of the accepted beliefs with which my mind was stocked before entering Utah, that every mother would be found to regret the birth of a daughter as a misfortune. This is not so. They honestly believe in the grand calling their theology assigns to women. Like, that's so beautiful. And there's some more there too. I didn't write it down in my little notes, but like this
Sure.
idea that like the Latter-day Saints were as happy about the birth of a daughter as a son. Like we valued men and women so equally. And like I see this all the time when I'm looking at this history. It's like the men and women of the church at that time were so unified and so supportive of one another. Like it almost like breaks my heart when I like look at like kind of like LDS Twitter spaces and there will be some like gender like conflict and I'm like it breaks my heart a little bit because I'm like we were so like unified as a people between men and women. I'm like that is incredibly
Right.
powerful and that is very meaningful. And the fact that especially these women are happy about these daughters, like that's I like it does bring tears to my eyes. It's really beautiful. I also think
Beautiful.
that uh I love Kathleen Flake's article, The Emotional and Priestly Logic of Plural Marriage.
Me
And she
too.
actually, it's so good. It's so interesting. And it, she really captures like that we have such a grand view of like what marriage is and like as a covenant and as a priestly, status, like that's so beautiful. But she also talks about Elizabeth Kane and I like how she words it. where she says, Elizabeth Kane was surprised by what she found in Utah's polygamous homes, both grand and simple. Essentially, she was surprised that notwithstanding their multiplicity of partners, their relationships conformed substantially to her ideal of Victorian domesticity. She was especially surprised to find among plural spouses a depth of emotional attachment that she considered romantic love. She noted that wives were not treated as a collective, but as individuals. More surprising to her was the extent to which plural marriage produced intense emotional attachments. For example, she had a conversation with Mrs. D in Salt Lake City about a recently widowed man. Elizabeth admitted, saying sarcastically that he would soon find another wife. Mrs. D missed the tone and simply responded, of course he would, but this was irrelevant to the man's grief. Her own husband, she said, had had 3 bereavements since we were married, and he seemed so lost we scarcely knew how to comfort him. The we
Mm.
meaning the other wives. Elizabeth exclaimed, meeting another husband, like relationships aren't interchangeable or replaceable. They're unique, and like I think there is a really beautiful thing where it's like there was this individualism in those individual relationships. Um, Meeting another husband who carried a daguerreotype of a wife dead 2 years, Elizabeth thought to herself, here at last is one man high in Mormon esteem, yet a monogamist, only to learn that he had 3 other wives.
Mm.
Second, Elizabeth was surprised by the relationship among the wives themselves. When the daguerreotype of the deceased wife was shown, the other wives spontaneously began lamenting their loss of her. One said, one said Elizabeth wept herself as she eulogized Sister Helen's virtues. Thus, Elizabeth's account of women's bonds in plural marriage depicts more than a morally laudable renunciation of jealousy. As Dr. Bushman concluded in her study, while these women loved and respected their husbands, the wives themselves often moved an interesting counterpoint, almost like a married couple themselves. Applying the term
Mm.
marriage to the women's relationships helps us seize the aptitude of the much contested label polygamy. Most writers on the subject will grouse that the proper term should be polygyny, since these were marriages of one man to many women. But the label used by the saints implied the sense of many marriages or a network of marriages, not just many spouses. This is the sense implicit also. This is implicit also in Elizabeth's description of the family she lived with in the winter of 1872. Some plural marriages, it appeared, could produce a fair, firm league of love and prayer. Indeed, as it appears that in marriage, Mormons privileged independence over emotional attunement. Those who thrived in plural marriage said so explicitly. Mary Elizabeth Horne was invited by the interviewer to compare her experience in polygamy to the 28 years she had lived with her husband monogamously. She said matter of factly, plural marriage destroys the oneness, of course. But to her, that oneness had meant she was so bound and so united to her husband that she could do nothing without him. That sounds like codependency. Though it had been a trial of her feelings to lose it, she could now see some advantages. Namely, she is freer and can do herself individually things she could never have attempted before and work out her individual character as separate from her husband. Again, this and other credible accounts of successful plurality in marriage show more than a disciplined restraint of jealousy and pragmatic response to their husband's absence. They indicate also that for those who thrived in plural marriage, psychological individuation and emotional independence it produced were deemed virtues in their own right. That's really,
Mm.
really powerful to me. I think that there is this kind of fear where it's like, well, the woman, when he's with his other wife or wives, this woman is abandoned, and it's like, why do women's lives stop when a man's not with them? Like, I disagree. I balk at that. Really, I'm like, it's also not. It's like we're meant to have a lot of, at least friendships and relationships in like this community at
Yeah.
Zion, right? But anyway, I think that is a really interesting thing. Uh, Okay. Well, then we have the Great Indignation Meeting. So this was in 1870, in January, where the Cullen Bill was being introduced in Congress, and 5,000 women in Salt Lake like held this giant protest and had this big meeting where it was only women speaking in the tabernacle, and they invited these. The only men were male news reporters that they wanted to have listen to them and take it out, and they just like
Mm.
spoke and spoke and spoke. And I really love this quote from Eliza R. Snow Smith. Um, Our enemies pretend that in Utah, women is held in a state of vassalage, that she does not act for choice, but by coercion, that we would even prefer life elsewhere were it possible to make our escape. What nonsense. We all know that if we wished, we could leave at any time, either to go singly, or we could rise en masse. We could rise en masse, and there would be no power here that could or would ever wish to prevent us. I will now ask this intelligent assembly of ladies, do you know of any place on the face of the earth where woman has more liberty and where she enjoys such high and glorious privileges as she does here as a Latter-day Saint? No. The very idea of women here in a state of slavery is a burlesque on common good sense. Instead of being lorded over by tyrannical husbands, we, the ladies of Utah, are already in possession of a privilege which many intelligent and high-aiming ladies in the states are earnestly seeking, i.e. the right to vote. Although we as of yet have not been admitted to the common ballot box, to us the right of suffrage is extended in matters of far greater importance. And of course, she's referring to the ecclesiastical vote that women have had since the beginning of the church. And about a month after she said this, we did have the right to vote, and we're the first women in the United States to vote. That's incredible. The New York Herald published about this, and they said, it will not be denied that the Mormon women have both brains and tongues. Some of the speeches give evidence that in general knowledge and logic and in rhetoric, the so-called degraded ladies of Mormondom are quite equal to the women's rights women of the East. Like, this is an outsider, like Gentile guy from the East who's coming in and like seeing these women talking. I don't know. I just think it's very hard for like Brigham Young to be puppeting these women to like say these like really, really incredible and sophisticated arguments. And then this goes to like women's suffrage generally. The church has always like was very much behind it. It was sustained by both men and women. It's like, let's do this. In the state, when it was removed from us, it was removed from us federally because women of Utah weren't voting like they wanted us to vote. They wanted us to get rid of it, and we didn't. And it's like, okay, if you have the right to vote, like, and people will be like, well, they just voted how their husbands told them. And I'm like, okay, like, there becomes a point where there's no way to satisfy people, where like, how? They're all on missions too. And so it's like, who's leaning over their shoulder, making them mark what they want to do? They were very adamant. I mean, Eliza R. Snow Smith said, like, the Relief Societies had like civic classes for women that they were like, let's all make sure that we're like engaged. And Eliza R. Snow Smith said, like, it is as much an obligation to vote as it is to pray. Like, we need to be doing this. We need to be actively engaged in this. And it was incredible. Like, the Relief Society was a political force. And it's incredible. At our state constitutional convention, where we were in 96, like, going to add women's right to vote into the state constitution, there was some pushback by B.H. Roberts. I love B.H. Roberts, but I was like, bro, stop it. Which he was saying, like, is this a risky move? We were denied statehood so many times. But there were a lot of, like, the church kind of censured him, was like, shut up. We are giving women the right to vote. Like, this is happening. There's a really beautiful quote from Orson F. Whitney, who's the son of Helen Mar Kimball, by the way. I believe in a future for women. I do not believe that she was made merely for a wife, a mother, a cook, and a housekeeper. These callings, however honorable, and no one doubts that they are so, are not the sum of her capabilities. And then he also said, it is woman's destiny to have a voice in the affairs of the government. She was designed for it. She has a right to it. This great social upheaval, this women's movement that is making itself heard and felt, means something more than that certain women are ambitious to vote and hold office. I regard it as one of the great levers by which the Almighty is lifting up this fallen world, lifting it nearer to the throne of its creator. And this is something that the early Latter-day Saints did believe. They believed that the elevation of women was part of the restoration and the dispensation of the fullness of times. I think that Sarah M. Kimball said, like, I think she refers to the date of the Relief Society being organized and says that was the moment that women's suffrage was inevitable after that, you know, like, and this idea that, like, what, it's so funny, like, they pointed to things like the Seneca Falls Convention, which is like one of like the standard, like, huge, like, first women's suffrage pushes in the United States meetings. There's not a Latter-day Saint there, but the Latter-day Saints were like, because the Restoration happened and there was an outpouring of light and truth, that happened because of the Restoration. So that was us also. And like, that's beautiful. That's so interesting. The fact that we're like, we are claiming that we want to elevate the rights of women. And they're simultaneously practicing polygamy. So I'm like, okay, so was Utah hell on earth, or are women act like active agents in their life and they're wanting to be elevated? We have things like the woman's exponent that people do not read enough. And I also get really frustrated when people will talk about the woman's exponent and talk about Emily B. Wells and say, oh, well, she was defending this, but like, look at the sad journal entry where she felt neglected by her husband. And I'm like, okay, well, did you read later in her journal where she kind of rekindled her romance with her husband, and he describes them like, it feels like we're young lovers, and she's kind of giddy and she's like, this is like really sweet and lovely, and she's like all sweet. And she also like she proposed to him and became his sixth wife. So this idea also, Daniel H. Wells, an incredibly busy man, like he had so much that he was going on. She proposed to him. Like the fact that maybe at the beginning of the relationship he's not as like emotionally invested, I don't find that extraordinarily surprising. But they certainly were deeply in love later in life. And that's really, really beautiful. And that shows that, like, as she's aging, she's not being discarded, right? That's like a really incredible and powerful idea. Uh, the fact that we can point to, like, well, she was sad in her journal. I'm like, if people read my journal, they would be like, oh my gosh, because people like to write in their journal when they're feeling sad, and it's cathartic and it's therapeutic. And that doesn't mean it's not true. I do think that that's true, and that's a part of her. But to say that that was the sum of it and therefore discounts all other aspects of her life and her public discourse, I think is silly. Because that's not how human psychology is. We can feel a lot of things at the same time. We can go through those things. I find that frustrating, that people will point to that quote and then erase Emmeline's entire voice and character arc, if you will.
Absolutely.
Then
Absolutely.
we have Martha Hughes Cannon. Martha Hughes Cannon, the first female state senator that we ever had. Her statue is now in Washington, D.C., alongside Brigham Young representing Utah. We're one of like only 19 women statues like representing the states out of 100. Like we have one of those. That's incredible. She ran against her husband and she won. So that's a woman who's being controlled by her husband, one who runs against him politically and wins. Like, and she had, I mean, I've read her biography. She would get in little fights with him. Like they definitely had some conflict. But like she loved him too. Like, and they had a lot going on. And she even talks about like, because she was a doctor, also, she was a doctor, she went to medical school, like, and had a whole career. Um, because she was a doctor and she's delivering babies and stuff, she often had to like run away. And she has this letter where she's like, I think we would be so happy if we could live in ordinary plurality. Like if we could just be together, like this would be so nice. Like the fact that the government is imposing these things to create this distance is really frustrating. And speaking of that, I had a friend, this was actually Jessica, who has a family, like an ancestor that she had
Mhm.
always been told and understood that like she was kind of abandoned by her husband. Like the husband was with one of the other wives and she was sad and was like, oh, kind of one of those sad women stories of
Yeah.
like she's been abandoned. She re-looked into it. That's not what happened. What happened was the Edmunds Tucker Act happened. And so he was barred from seeing her. And yes, she was sad about it, but it was because the government prevented it. It wasn't him abandoning her. It was a result of federal persecution. And like, that's meaningful, And like, it's like, whoa, I had understood a different narrative than was true. Also, like, just women dominated the medical field in Utah. Like, women were regularly called,
Yes.
and like they were called to become doctors. They got medical degrees. They were midwives. The Deseret Hospital Board of Directors was entirely women. The hospitals were owned by women. Like, I'm just, and the idea that like that's a way of men controlling them. I'm like, why? Then when is a woman ever free? If she can own and run the hospital entirely in the medical field, and that's a form of oppressing her, then I'm like, then we're just inherently oppressed, I guess. I don't know. I think that is a difficult argument to make. We also have Joseph S. Smith in the General Relief Society meeting is like advocating for closing the wage gap. He's like, God never did design that a woman should receive less for the product of her labor, that a man should than the man should receive for the same labor. Nor did he design that women should be required to bear equal burdens with men without sharing equally the benefit thereof. Why should one enjoy civil rights and the others be denied them? Why should one be admitted to all avenues of mental and physical progress and prosperity and the other be prohibited and prescribed within certain narrow limits to a material abridgment and detriment? This is incredible. Like, this is like like we were an we were so pro women's rights as a church is incredible. And now I want to address Brigham Young now. Something that people will always pull out is that one where he's like, these women are whining. I need to shut up, you know? And everyone loves to pull that out and be like, he's so mean. And my question becomes, have you read the entire discourse? Because I have. And it's actually really good. He talks to them about, like, hey, do you want to do this or not? And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But if you're going to do it, then, like, don't whine about it, which is a reasonable thing. A lot of Brigham Young's discourses, I sometimes am like, this does feel like group therapy. And I'm like, look at it, I'm like, that's something a therapist today like would say. Maybe not in the same tone, but certainly the message. And I'm like, that's interesting. So here's some things he says where he's like, I wish my own women to understand what I'm going to say is for them as well as others. And I want to tell their sisters, yes, all the women of this community, and then write it back to the states and do as you please with it. I'm going to give you from this day to the 6th of October next for reflection, that you may determine if you wish to stay with your husbands or not. And then I'm going to set every woman at liberty and say to them, now go your way. My women with the rest, go your way. And my wives have got to do one of two things, either round their shoulders and endure the affliction of this world and live their religion, or they may leave. For I will not have them about me. I will go into heaven alone rather than have the scratching and fighting about me, and I will set them at liberty. Why the first wife too? Yes, I will liberate you all. That's pretty reasonable. And now he says, and this is what people bring up, and I'm like, he addresses this in the discourse. Now, no doubt some are thinking, I wish Brother Brigham would say what would become of the children. I will tell you what my feelings are. I will let my wives take the children, and I have property enough to support them and to educate them and give them a good fortune, and I can take a fresh start. I like you can take your children. I do not desire to keep a particle of my property, except that what is to protect me from a state of nudity. And I would say wives are welcome to the children. Wives are welcome to the children. He does say, don't teach them iniquity. For if you do, I'll send an elder or come myself to teach them a gospel. He's like, instruct them this. I want them to still learn the gospel, which, okay, whatever. But like, he's like, take them. And let every man thus treat his wives, keeping raiment enough to clothe his body, and say to your wives, take all that I have and be set at liberty. But if you stay with me, you must comply with the law of God, and too without any murmuring and whining. You must fulfill the law of God in every respect, and round your shoulders and walk up to the mark without any grunting. Sisters, I am not joking. I do not throw out my proposition to banter your feelings, to see whether you will leave your husbands or all or any of you. Like, he's like, this is a legitimate offer, but it's totally reasonable. If you're going to be whining about something or complaining about something, then don't do it. You know, like, don't either be all in or he's saying make a decision. You can't be halfway in. I think that's a very reasonable thing to ask, and is like a mentally healthy one to ask. And also, he's giving them a lot of opportunity. And he also talks about kind of this emotional aspect of it. But, says one, I want to have my paradise now. And says another, I did think I should be in paradise if I was sealed to Brother Brigham. And I thought I should be happy when I became his wife, or Brother Heber's. I loved you so much, and I thought I was going to have heaven right off here on the spot. What a curious doctrine it is that we are preparing to enjoy. The only heaven for you is that which you make yourselves. My heaven is here, laying his hand upon his heart. I carry it with me. When do I expect its perfection? When I come up in the resurrection. Then shall I have it, and not till then. But the women come and say, really, Brother John and Brother William, I thought you were going to make a heaven for me. And they get into trouble because a heaven is not made for them by men, even though agency is upon women as well as men. And I think that's really reasonable. Like, you don't get your happiness from other people. Like, you are a full person, and your marriage relationship, of course, is your most important relationship. But this codependency of like, I need you to make me happy is never going to make you happy. In monogamy, I mean, you see this with people when they're having marital problems. They're like, let's have a baby and that will fix it. And it's like, and then it doesn't fix it. And I'm like, well, like, because you're not working on the root issue, which is like
Um,
self-imposed. I mean, what he's saying there in that circumstance, I'm like, that's like, I've had a therapist say that to me, like that's good.
sure.
That's good information. So when they pull the whining quote, I'm like, okay, read the whole thing because you clearly haven't. Like, it's a reasonable thing that he's saying.
Um,
Okay, this is the next Brigham point,
yeah,
which is that like Brigham Young, I I he like loved and believed that women were capable people. And that's why he also expected a lot from women. Like, and I really like that aspect of him a ton. Like, I think he doesn't have a problematic approach to gender, in my opinion. Here's some
um,
things he says upholding women's agency in the context of polygamy. When your daughters have grown up and wish to marry, let them have their choice in a husband if they know what their choice is. But if they should happen only to guess at it and marry the wrong man, why let them try again. And if they do not get it right, get it the right place the second time, let them try again. This is the way I shall do with my daughters, and it is the way I have already done. Take this or that man if you want them, my girls. I give you good counsel about it. Nevertheless, you shall have your own agency in this matter, even as I want mine. Like, we also know that Brigham Young was very liberal with granting women divorces. Like, he's like, if a woman wants a
mhm,
divorce, he granted it. If a man wanted a divorce, he was not so lenient. He did view that it's like there's an obligation going on there, which honestly we see in the family proclamation. We have a man is to provide for his family, whose family it's wife and child, and women are to nurture their children, only children, right? We get so focused on provide and nurture that we're not looking at those things. That implies that men have an obligation to their wives that wives do not have in the reverse. And this makes sense with the asymmetrical nature of the reproductive relationship. And this is really beautiful. Like, the fact that, like, I mean, my reading of like VNC 132 is actually that it's supposed to be administered and run by women. Um, so I will maybe make another video about that in the future. Um, here's something else that he says. Uh, you may see, because people will talk about like, well, these women were compelled into polygamy or into these marriages because they're like eternal, like their exaltation, their salvation was threatened. Um, I would just like to share what he has to say about that. You may see a great many miserly persons with regard to dollars and cents. It is just as natural for men to be miserly with regard to their religious blessings. You may see hundreds of elders who say to sisters, come and be sealed to me, crawling round to make the holy ordinances of God a matter of speculation to administer to their avaricious dispositions. They will tell you that you will go into eternity and find yourselves without husbands, and you cannot get an exaltation, that you cannot have this, that, or the other unless you are sealed to them. I am free, and so are you. My advice to the sisters is never be sealed to any man unless you wish to be. I say to you, high priests and elders, never from this time ask a woman to be sealed to you unless she wants to be. And then later he
mm,
says, the elders going around telling the sisters they must be sealed to them or cannot get an exaltation, particularly has wounded my feelings. How ignorant such men are. This to me is like a shadow. To talk about it is sheer nonsense. Let every man and woman magnify their calling in the kingdom of God, and he will take care of what we have of our exaltation. Let me hear no more, you must be sealed to me or you cannot get an exaltation.
mm,
That's really beautiful. I only recently came across this one, and I'm like, that's incredible. And like, regardless of the fact that, like, yes, he's acknowledging like there are men going around doing that and saying that and manipulating women in these ways. But that is not the institutional position, and that's certainly not Brigham Young's position. So to say that that's like an inherent part of the system is deeply flawed. I
mm,
also think that there's something really beautiful in terms of um, alienation. Both he and Joseph Smith had actually a lot of anti-marital rape rhetoric, where it was talking about like a couples who like have sex while their feelings are alienated from one another are sinning, which that inherently restricts marital rape, which at a time, I should remind the audience, was absolutely legal. And women were viewed as, they were legally viewed as property and one with the husband. Therefore, how can he, like, they would say, like, how can he rob his own property? And it's like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That's not how early Latter-day Saints saw that. And like, we know this was regularly with like, we look at like these younger marriages, but generally the understanding, the practice was like not to consummate them until the women wanted that. um and
Mm,
that's my understanding with Emmeline B. Wells in Nauvoo. Her It's a tragic story, but when she was 15, she married fellow 15-year-old James Harris. He went away, never heard from him again. It was sabotaged by her mother-in-law, which is really deeply sad, but she was abandoned and she had lost a child, and she was in this like state of like being alone, and she
right.
was taken in by the Whitneys and she was sealed to Newell K. Whitney and at 17. And she like didn't have sex with him for 3 years until she invited it. So
Mm,
like these weren't inherently like innately immediately sexual relationships, right?
yeah.
And that to impose that against the feelings of what the women wanted would be wrong. It was viewed as wrong. So here's another thing he said: when a woman becomes alienated in her feelings and affections from her husband, it is then his duty to give her a bill and set her free. Um, which would be because it would be fornication for a man to cohabit with his wife after she has become thus alienated from him. This is like really progressive stuff for this time. Like this is crazy. Um, Now to switch to some women, let's look at Belle Harris. So there's the prison journals of Belle Harris. That's on the church history. It's available. I've read them. It's great.
Mm,
This is a woman who refused to testify against her husband for polygamy, and she's like, no. And she was willing to go to jail, and she had her like young baby, and she was like, no, I'm not going to betray him because like I love him, and like we're not doing this. And she was willing to do that for this conviction. Like I just don't see how she was compelled or manipulated into that. That seems like, and especially reading her words, I'm like, this is a woman with her own convictions and feelings about this, and she's making an informed choice, and that she feels like her rights are being violated by being forced to do that. And she's like, I don't have to say anything. You cannot compel me to testify. And like, what a cool woman with so much like fortitude and conviction about what she thought. We also know, hilariously, there are women who are like, we're so worried about these polygamous women, like we need to save them, and so they made the Industrial Christian Home for Polygamous Wives. Do you know about this?
I don't know about this.
They made a domestic shelter for polygamous wives. Like it's like, okay, if you want to escape, we'll take you in, we'll take care of you, we'll like get you set up. We have a place for you to run away to. It closed due to low occupancy, and it never reached full occupancy, and they had to actually announce like, guys, we're not taking monogamous women, we're only taking polygamous women. And they just never, people didn't need it. They had built this whole thing, and then they're like, well, we have to close because like no one is utilizing this service. I think that's really telling, the fact that they weren't doing that. So this idea is like, where were the women gonna go? They couldn't run away. And like maybe pre-railroad, you can kind of make that decision, but it's like people were apostatizing all the time. And Brigham Young was like, if you're gonna apostatize, go to California then. Just like go away. I don't want you here if you're in apostasy. Like people left. And so it's like if this idea that's like these women couldn't leave. I'm like, well, what about all the ones who did? What are we to make of them? Like they're imaginary. I don't know. It's very silly to me. Um, there was also, I mean, there's really interesting conversations after the Supreme Court decision, which was like very, very devastating. And oh shoot, I should pull up. I might pull up Eliza R. Snow's letter that she wrote and published after the Supreme Court decision, the Reynolds versus United States, which upheld the legitimacy of the legislation outlawing polygamy. I'll pull that in a second. But something that was really lovely is, like, I mean, George Hughes Cannon's talking about, like, with the Brethren are consulting, and it's like, this is so sad. And they're like, young women in excess of for the demands of marriage who have no alternative but to remain old maids or take up with any worthless person that might make them offers. Like, they're sad for the women. Like, he kind of talks about it this way. And he's also talking about, like, how much he loves and believes he has an obligation to his wives. And he says, I spoke quite strongly about the practice of selecting what we call legal wives to live with and relegating the others into a condition akin to concubinage. I fear the effect of this practice. Like, first of all, he's like, the children are going to resent this because their mothers are being treated so unfairly. And, like, this is going to have a lot of traumatic consequences. And he said, I thought it was a bad condition of affairs and everything should be done to endeavor to correct it. For myself, if I cannot live with all my wives and treat them all alike, I do not want to live with any of them. I do not want to create a distinction in my family of this kind, as I have married all of my wives with the same covenant and with a clear understanding and mutual agreement on the side to live in that relation. Like, this, the obligation that men felt they had to women, which they did have, like, is really beautiful. And yes, of course, there are men who did abandon their wives and were bad, you know, like did
Sure.
abusive things. And they are under condemnation for that, just like we see when monogamous marriages become abusive. Any system can become abusive. If you give me a second, I'm going to pull up this Eliza R. Snow thing. Here's what she said. Decision of the Supreme
Perfect.
Court of the United States in the Reynolds case. And then she quotes Micah, let our eye look upon Zion, let her be defied. Let us enter the private sanctity of domestic life, when, to the honor of this great republic, the divinity of the marriage tie is acknowledged and held sacred, and where virtue, the crowning glory of the social circle, is bravely and successfully protected. Let us there, with wanton cruelty, defy the constitution of our country, and by trampling on the rights of conscience, sever the holy ties of wedlock, separate husbands and wives, parents and children, and ignore the finest affections of the human heart. Yea, let us cause thousands of honorable, loving wives to be stigmatized as prostitutes, and their offspring as bastards. Let us cause multitudes of innocent children that now are being tenderly cherished and educated to be branded with infamy and deprived of heirship. Let us desecrate their homes and exterminate the only people of whom our nation can truly boast as protectors of purity and innocence, lest their virtuous and honorable example shall, in the present reign of corruption, rise up before us as a burning reproof. Let us immure in loathsome prisons those brave men who, for the sake of worshiping God according to the dictates of their conscience, left their homes and the graves of their noble ancestors and sought refuge in the sterile American desert, where, nerved by the power of faith in the arm of Jehovah, for a while they battled and with elements of life, and at length with indomitable energy overcame the hardness of the soil and made the desert blossom as a rose. Those are the men who, with their stalwart sons, the offspring of plural celestial marriage, and with stern, unyielding perseverance, established a connecting link between the commercial cities of the East and the rich mining districts of the West, and made practical for the nation the continental transit of the iron horse. Let us erase from the book of remembrance the countless deeds of hospitality and generosity bestowed by those early settlers of the wilderness on our perishing immigrants when their supplies were exhausted as they were wending their way through California. Let us plant the seeds of devastation in a thriving, peaceful, industrious community, a charity brought into existence and made to flourish without aid, encouragement, or protection from the government under which it exists. Yea, let us abridge the rights of its founders, inasmuch that henceforth it shall be controlled by gamblers and speculators who have no interest in common with the people. Instead of the territory of Utah as it is now, a place of peace, good order, and happiness, let us, through our crushing policy, exhibit it to the nations abroad as a spectacle of confusion, desolation, and woe. Let us tear asunder that mighty shield of the rights of conscience, our glorious Constitution. Let us place our veto on the commands of the Almighty, and presume to measure arms with the great ruler of the universe. Thus saith the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the court of final decision, the highest tribunal of a great and powerful nation, the last resort to which an oppressed American citizen can appeal for protection, and suffering innocence for redress. Eliza R. Snow. She's really angry, and I think rightfully so. And yeah, I think that women had a lot of things going for them in this territory, and I think that to erase that and say that they are victims and puppets of men is like a extremely cruel and misogynistic take.
Thank you so much for. Are you going to be part of this fight for a while?
Yes, because I when I've had private conversations with people in my life about this topic and I'm able to express my perspective, like it's been like a
Mhm.
really profound experience where there's kind of like this relief of like, oh, this is a way I can like approach this. Like this is a way I can think about this. And regardless if there's difference, like it's like a really it's like a really beautiful thing. And I love the church and I do get frustrated with the idea that like it's being accused as like it's men versus women and women have one particular way of looking at it, and I'm like, I don't think that that's accurate. And so I do want to be involved in this conversation publicly for a while.
That was Celine promising us that she's not going anywhere. Um, you can find Celine on Facebook if you're interested in being in touch with her about this interview. And I'm sure she'll stick around and answer some questions in the YouTube comments. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.